Hello weirdos, welcome back to my channel. My name is EmmaAbe and today we are going to be doing a wrap-up. I am so excited. I love doing wrap-ups. Read a lot this month and I read 23 books, which is I think the most books I've ever read in a month on this channel, which is kind of crazy. I think I just had like lots of obligations. I had the second half of the Summer of Contemporary Readathon where I had to read some books. And then I also had the summer school readathon, which I was also doing, and then I had just had some stuff to finish up for the BookTube prize. I think that contributes to all my reading. I'm sorry if I keep looking over there. Got a little... the baby. So keep checking on her, make sure she's okay. If you hear whimpering, it's her. Let's get started right away. The very first book I finished is Speak by Lori Halsey Anderson. I read this for the Summer of Contemporary Readathon. Oh my god, this is really good. For some reason I went into it thinking it was like a poetry collection. Not really that, it's just contemporary. And it was so good. I don't want to reveal too much about this book because I think you benefit from not knowing that much. But let's just say it's very heavy. There are trigger warnings. Basically, it follows this girl named Melinda, and she's starting high school, and she doesn't really speak that much. She does speak, but she's very quiet, and something happened over the summer that has made people not like her. I think that is about all you need to know and all you should know before going into this. I think I'm going to give this like a 5 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend it, and I think there's good reason why this is constantly being recommended at schools. And yeah, there's just lots of really good conversations that can be had surrounding this book. Yeah, this is one that I'd recommend if you want to learn more about the dangers women face in general. This one I followed along to because I had a copy of it. For the second book I read, it was A Woman of No Importance, the untold story of the American spy who helped win World War II by Sonia Parnell. And I read this for the BookTube prize. I ranked this 6th. 6th is the worst. If you don't know what the BookTube prize is, I'll leave the information down in the description below. It's not like a terrible book. It made it to the 3rd round, which is significant. The reason why I put it 6 was because there's just a lot of things that I just personally didn't like, and it just wasn't personally to my taste. Mainly being it's about spies, and I'm not super into spies, although I do like that it doesn't try and like make it something it's not. It's a very realistic look about how hard spy life was and how dangerous it was. Also, I just didn't like it, and I was kind of mad at it because it took one of the spots that I thought other books were deserving of. So in that way, it wasn't really to my personal taste. And I thought it was way longer than it needed to. For those reasons, I kind of like, I'm teetering in between a 3 and a 4 because it's got the qualities of a 4, but I just personally didn't like it. I will say though, it is an amazing story and a story that just needs to be told. I think it is ripe for a movie adaptation for the simple fact that it is a story of a woman. And not only a woman, but a disabled woman. It just isn't to my personal taste. And that's why I personally didn't like it. You can find out more in my video I posted last week about my thoughts about round 2. And I talk about it right away. So if you don't want to sit through the whole video, you can just watch like the first, 7 minutes. The next book I read is The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. I read this because it was the group read for the Summer of Contemporary Readathon. Oh my god, it was so cute. I'm so glad that I prioritized it and I got it finished. It was cutting it really close there. But I was so excited to discuss it with everyone. And it's this really cute story about these 2 people. One of them is a Korean American and the other is like Jamaican American, but she's an illegal immigrant. So her family is being deported and the whole story kind of takes place over one day, and it was really interesting. I like the way it ended more realistically than you think it would. I thought it was really cute. I will say I did not appreciate at the end all of the like digs at like long distance relationships. Also, there's like this thing with like an omniscient narrator that I thought was interesting, and it was a choice. and I didn't hate it. It just was weird, but it also allowed for all of these little cool asides that I really loved. Like, you learn why a lot of Koreans own black hair care shops. I hope that's in the movie adaptation. I have not seen the movie adaptation. I hope it's just as cute as the book, because I thought the book was really cute and was like a 4 out of 5. And just read it if you want something like lighter and fluffier, which we all could use something light and fluffy sometimes. I really loved how well their conversations about their race and the fact that it's an interracial relationship is a factor. I believe that, like, if you are in an interracial relationship, one of the things you should be talking about is race and your cultures and how they differ and how that affects your relationship, because it's relevant, especially if you are going more the serious route. Not saying you have to talk about it all the time, but it should come up kind of naturally, and I loved that those conversations were also talked about. I loved it. I thought it was really cute. Again, 4 out of 5. The next book I read is Searching for Siri Lee by Jean Kwok. I thought that this was really interesting. I didn't know anything about this book going into it, so I didn't really know what I was expecting. I knew it was kind of like a disappearance type thing because of the title. Essentially follows, I forget like all the names of the characters except for Sylvie. Sylvie and her sister, they're Chinese American. Sylvie spent like a bunch of years of her childhood in Holland with some of her family there. She goes back to Holland when she's an adult years later and doesn't come back. And her sister is like, what is going on? I need to figure out. Sylvie just wouldn't disappear off the face of the planet and not tell us. So she goes to Holland to investigate. And it was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. What I really loved is like all of the little details that throw back nuggets also to the Chinese language. The mother, she grew up in China and everything and then immigrated, and she refers to China as the middle country and America as the beautiful country, because in China that's literally what their names translate to. And I just really enjoyed that. Those are little like nuggets that you wouldn't really like pick up on, or you're just gonna be like, what? And they don't really explain them. So it's just nice, like for me, like someone who is trying to learn Chinese, to see those little nuggets and like be able to appreciate like, oh, like she's literally saying that because it's literally what that means, like in her language, in her native language. And I really love that. All those little details like that throughout the book were great. The structure is like non-linear, so it goes like back and forth. And I was reading this on audio, but otherwise really interesting. For kind of all those reasons, I would give it a 4 to 5. I thought it was really great, but I don't read a lot of like those types of genres. The reason I picked this book up in the first place was because during May, I was just putting a bunch of books on hold that had to do with Asians because I was bored and I had nothing to do. Yeah, so some of them are starting to come in or have been coming in, or I'm just finally now getting around to them. Next is Know My Name by Chanel Mailer. Oh my god, read this. Read this. Do I need to say more? Read this. This is a book I read for the BookTube prize. I ranked this number 2, but this almost made me cry, and I talk a lot more about it and I gush a whole ton more in my BookTube prize video. But I love this so much, I went and got a physical copy of it and I paid full price for it, and you guys know how much I hate paying full price if I don't. This is like one of those books I feel like I had to own. It was so good, and if you don't know, it is Chanel Miller's memoir of the process of what it was like getting justice for when she was raped. So obviously, trigger warning for that. This Along with Speak is kind of like one of those books that you should read if you really want to get into the mindset of what it is like to be someone who is hurt in that way. Yeah, I kind of recommend it to people who don't understand or don't really understand why victims don't come forward. I think this book will kind of help you explain why, because you see over and over how difficult it is to even get a court date and how hard that is, especially when you are trying to move on with your life. If you are continuing in school, it is so hard. Really, really good. I really, really loved it. There are descriptions that I just felt on such a personal level. If you want to learn more about this, go watch that other video. This is like 5 out of 5. This is so fucking good. Oh my god, read it. This next book is a book that I have been working on for fucking forever. and that is They Came Before Columbus, The African Presence in Ancient America by Ivan van Sertima. This book I started back in February. So yeah, it took me a while to read. This doesn't have an audiobook, so I read this with my eyeballs. And the reason it took me so long was just that I kept picking it up and putting it down, and I put it down. And then pandemic happened. I definitely intended to read this like in March or finish it in March, and yeah, no, pandemic happened. March was when shutdowns hit and kind of like all of our lives were upturned. I'm kind of embarrassed on like how long it took me to read this. It was really interesting. It was really interesting to see the arguments about why. So this is a very academic work. It's not for the layman. You are just kind of interested in the general theory, and I will explain what the actual theory is in right now. The actual theory is put forth by a couple of scientists. There's not a whole lot of scholarship on this actual idea, but it is an idea that talks about the fact that Africans actually made it to the Americas before Columbus and had an influence on things like Native American art. I don't know how I feel about the certainty of this theory. I think it is a really interesting theory. My issue is that in order to prove this, the evidence would have to be so high, and I just don't feel like we have the evidence. I don't know. I think it is plausible for some people to have made it over. I just don't know if it's plausible to have the effect that this book is claiming. And I don't really want to like spoil much of it because I'm very unsure about the extent, because the extent seems to be very large. While that's kind of how I feel, I will say that this book points out a lot of the racism that was involved with early anthropology and early scholarship into this matter. Like, there's lots of arguments that it wasn't even possible put forth by white people, that it wasn't even possible for Africans to make it to America because they didn't have the shipbuilding techniques. But it's like, then how could they build boats, sail the Indian Ocean to make trades with China? It just doesn't make sense. So he brings up a lot of stuff like that. He really points out that a lot of those racist views are still quite prevalent in America today, and he spends a really good job. He spends a good chunk of time dissecting African culture and Native American culture just to sort of explain the context, and also to show that these weren't people just rubbing sticks together. These were sophisticated societies with very sophisticated, very complex cultures, which absolutely, that's absolutely what they were. But that is not the message we always hear in history classes, at least not in America. I really liked this book for that aspect of it. I don't know if this is controversial to say, but at some times it felt like he was attributing all of this art, taking the credit from the Native Americans and giving it to Africans. And that's kind of, it rang a little bit kind of like Ancient Aliens, except way not to the same extreme to me. So the whole time I'm sitting there, like as an anthropologist, and I'm like, cultural traits can arise in different cultures independently. That is a thing that happens. It's why there's a thing in anthropology, cultural universals. I don't know. If anyone's read this book or has any thoughts about this theory and has read anything about it, let me know in your comments down below. I haven't made up my mind because I keep going back and forth, and I'm just like, I just don't know where I fall. I think I'm gonna give it like a 4 out of 5. It's made me think a lot, and it's just like, I don't know. Okay, next is Professor Stewart's Casebook of Mathematical Mysteries by Ian Stewart. So this is a book I picked up for the summer school readathon I enjoyed this. Some parts of it were very difficult to understand, and I had to reread it a bunch of times, but I really like the setup because the author uses this Sherlock Holmes-esque characters, kind of like riff on Sherlock too. It's funny. So it was different than what I was expecting, but good. And I thought it was really interesting. And you could just read it. There's some parts that do deal with those two characters, and there's some parts that are just mathematical problems. They have a whole answers section, so you do have the opportunity to try and figure out these mysteries on your own before you cheat, kind of, and look up the answer yourself. It's really interesting, and sometimes it was funny, and then there were some times where I was just like, wow, this is exactly like just two nerds talking about fucking math, and I really liked it. To me, as someone who enjoys math, like, I appreciated this. This is kind of like as the YouTube channel Number Files. So if you enjoy Number Files videos, then you might enjoy this book. If you don't, then don't read this book. But I want my dad to read this because I think it would be fun. And there's also like little like historical profiles too that just, it's just an interesting like collection of like 200 like mathematical mysteries. For that, I liked it. I'm gonna give it a 4 because it wasn't like the best thing ever, but it was also like, for what it was very enjoyable. Next book I read is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kirsten R. Godsey. I felt like not necessarily like disappointed, but this wasn't exactly like what I thought it was gonna be. I read it because how could you not read something titled like that? I thought it was going to be a really interesting look at socialism and socialist countries, so kind of looking at like the USSR and looking at China and really dissecting kind of more women's issues in that. I was really excited to look at that, but what I got was slightly different. It was kind of looking at those countries, but also taking a reflexive look at America and looking at what we could implement to implement the good bits of socialism into America. That was interesting. That's just not what I thought it was gonna get in the book. I agree with like a lot of what was said in the book, especially when she's talking about like financial independence. A lot of that and a lot of sexual stuff. It was short. I think it was like 5-ish hours. It's not too much of an investment, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted. So in that way I was disappointed, and that's kind of what gives it a 3 in my mind. The next book I read is The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rosenhold. And this seemed really interesting, but I honestly didn't find it that interesting. I didn't really care that much about these women's lives. I think what I got out of it was these women weren't really prostitutes as they are constantly proclaimed on practically every single site. It's a lack of nuance, and it has to do a lot with like sexism of the time, assuming that, oh well, if you were anyone really who was enjoying like more of free sex, or anyone who wasn't following strict gender rules, or a single woman living by herself trying to be more independent, you were kind of labeled a prostitute. For that reason I found it interesting. I just did not like care enough about these individual women's lives and what brought them to be where they. I did like kind of like the style on kind of how we should start approaching crime, because there I think is a problem in kind of like the true crime community with glorifying murderers and serial killers that I don't think is cute. I really liked that the focus of this book was not on Jack the Ripper and trying to figure out what reason he could possibly have for killing these women, because ultimately like that doesn't matter. What matters is that he took these lives that had family, that had people that cared about them, and no one ever talks about these women who were murdered. This one I read solely on audio. Oh, also, this won the nonfiction award for the Goodreads Choice Award. Something like that. Or history. I don't really remember off the top of my head. I've read some of the other books that have won, and I guess I'll talk about this more later when I actually do my wrap up of this challenge I'm doing. I don't think it is the best, but I also don't think it's the worst. You could have Girl Stop Apologizing. I think it has its merits, and if you're looking more for that, then go for it. Sound like a hypocrite freaking later, but I'm just not super into true crime as much. My interests have veered elsewhere, and I kind of don't care about these cold unsolved cases. I think I'm gonna give it like a 3, just because I just didn't care. It didn't make me care. I don't know what it was. The next.
Hey, this is Editing EmmaAbe here, and I would just like to say we're going to end this video here because my editing software decided to be stupid and stop processing the rest of the video. So that's it for this week. Next week you'll get the other half of this wrap up. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye. Do all of the fun stuff that you're supposed to do. Goodbye.